on climate change and facilitates evidence-based discussions and exchange with the Kenyan stakeholders who are present today. Ultimately, we hope that this conference will increase collaboration among key partners present today, and also some of the research will inform programs and also policies. The conference therefore aims to bring experts, researchers, policymakers, industry leaders to engage in meaningful discussions, explore innovative solutions, and collaborate on strategies that can combat the effects of climate change. So we are here to reflect on what is going on, but also looking ahead to see what we can do together as partners to mitigate some of the effects that we have experienced on climate change. So I believe we all have our programs. I'll just take a moment to reflect, for us to reflect on how the day is organized. We shall have
the lake, and we knew in the afternoon there would be rain. And interestingly, I've traveled around here and I found a school named Kibi. And I was wondering what it has. Kibi is in Kikuyu or Kivi or something like that, I asked. And I'm told it is fog. So I was wondering, this is very similar to the conditions under which I was born. So we here in the university, as a dean, we are running programs to try as much as possible to train our students to understand climate change. It is not something that you can observe in one day. When we tell them, sometimes you have to analyze data spanning over 30 years, 100 years and all, so that you can be able to see a small rise in temperature or drop in temperature. It doesn't look very real for them. But Kibi knows, because I know those days when I grew up, actually climatic conditions have changed tremendously, and so are our activities. And so we don't see any more forests, we don't hear the many birds that we used to hear, we cannot see the small dig-digs and things like that, which were very common in our environment. But we are learning so that we can go back and try to salvage the kind of environment which we have grown in and the kind of environment that we really want. So I am very glad to be in this meeting that really looks at the agriculture, health and food. My deputy executive dean from Kitui campus, if I can request that he can just stand so that people may know, is much more in charge of agriculture and food. That is Dr. Benjamin Danga from Kitui has come with his team, and we are trying to have our students understand what it means to do agriculture, to participate in agricultural activities in semi-arid and arid areas, because that is where Kitui is, in a semi-arid area. So I don't want to take so long, but I think my small experience as Kibi tells a lot about the environment. We have actually changed. I am a witness of the changes in climate. Maybe you are. And then we shall try as much as possible to impress on our younger generation that climate change is not a one-day event. It is something that continues, and our small activities that we do often contributes to these changes that we witness, maybe even in future. So,
from the melting ice caps in the Arctic to the rising sea levels, threatening coastal cities worldwide, the impacts of climate change are profound and far-reaching. As an American, I have witnessed firsthand the devastating effects of climate change in my own country. Severe hurricanes this year have caused widespread destruction, displacing thousands of people and causing billions of dollars in damages. Wildfires have ravaged large areas in the U.S., destroying homes and natural habitats, and leading to significant economic and environmental losses. These events underscore the urgent need for global action to address climate change. In Africa, the situation is equally dire. The continent is experiencing some of the most severe impacts of climate change, in particular East Africa, despite contributing the least to global greenhouse gas emissions. Rising temperatures, prolonged droughts, and erratic rainfall patterns are disrupting ecosystems, agriculture, water supplies, posing significant challenges to the livelihoods and well-being of millions and millions of people. Kenya is facing a critical moment as climate change profoundly impacts food systems, threatening food security, and increasing food prices due to reduced crop yields and altered weather patterns. Warmer temperatures and unpredictable rainfall exacerbate pests and diseases, endangering crops and livestock, while water availability issues affect irrigation and agricultural productivity. These challenges highlight the urgent need for sustainable food systems, climate-smart, climate-adaptive food systems. Additionally, climate change poses significant health risks, including heat stress, vector-borne diseases like malaria, and waterborne diseases such as cholera, further emphasizing the need for immediate action today and moving forward to protect the well-beings of all Kenyans. Our collaboration with Kenyatta University is a testament to the power of partnership in addressing complex challenges. Informed by our existing agreement, AIR and Kenyatta University are co-hosting this event as part of our broader collaboration to engage in academic partnerships, research, and innovation. Together, we are committed to fostering a multidisciplinary approach to tackle climate change issues through research. By integrating perspectives and expertise from the various fields that we have here today, and the various fields at AIR as well, we can develop more comprehensive and effective solutions together rather than separately and apart. This approach ensures that all aspects of the problem are considered, leading to more sustainable and resilient strategies. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge some of the distinguished guests who have joined us today. We are privileged to have the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Dr. Eng. Mr. Laurentian from the Climate Change Directorate of the State Department. I don't know if Mr. Laurentian has been able to join us yet, but he will likely be here today. From Kenyatta University, Professor Caroline Thorua, Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Outreach, and Professor Wanjohi, Vice Chancellor, Executive Deans, Professor Okello Agina, Dr. Perez Onono, and I'm terribly pronouncing these names, so I greatly apologize, and Dr. James Koske, and the Conference Planning Committee, both from AIR and Kenyatta University. From AIR, we have Dr. Thomas DeHoop, our Managing Economist and Program Area Lead for Agriculture, Food Security, and Nutrition, also our Climate Change Lead. We have Dr. Marluz Demiliano, I don't know where there's Marluz, hello. Senior economist with extensive experience in international development research, and of course our Kenya team here as well, working on different research projects. We also have our various partners who are here, and I'm very happy to welcome NDMA and USAID, the FAO, Give Directly, the Irish Embassy, JUICed, AERC, our Dahlberg compatriots, KEMRI, ICED, Save the Children, CISP, Groots Kenya, APHRC, Population Council, and ICRAF, ICRAF, to name a few. Your presence here today underscores the importance of this conference and the collaborative spirit needed to address climate change. So I conclude by saying this conference is tackling an urgent need, urgent challenges of climate change in Kenya and beyond by bringing together and uniting experts, stakeholders, policymakers. We can together create strategies to build resilience, adapt to changing conditions, and mitigate impacts of climate change on food systems and health. The insights and recommendations from this meeting today will shape future initiatives, policies, ensuring a sustainable and resilient future for Kenya. Asante sana, thank you very much.
Is affecting our country. We cannot agree that as a nation, we have witnessed over the years changes in the rainfall amount, intensity, and seasonal distribution. We have also witnessed changes in temperature and the effect of drought. We have also seen an increase in extreme and potentially damaging weather events like flooding, drought, and our people living along our coast. They have been reporting the challenges of rising sea levels. Scientists are also reporting changes in atmospheric carbon dioxide and atmospheric ozone concentration. Things that we know are all affecting agriculture. And let me say that agriculture, including livestock, forestry, and fisheries, has been found to be by far the most affected sector by climate change. Agriculture is extremely vulnerable to climate change because farming is so much weather dependent, especially in developing countries and among our small-scale farmers. Climate change is adding to the many economic and social challenges already being faced in our developing countries. It is leading to lower yields, higher prices, and increased malnutrition, especially among children. IPCC identifies agriculture as a sector that is particularly vulnerable to climate change. It reports that in some countries in Africa, yield from rain-fed agriculture could be reducing by up to 50% by year 2027. And in Central and South Asia, crop yield could fall by up to that percent. The main reason why African countries are particularly vulnerable to climate change is because of their high dependence on rain-fed agriculture, high level of poverty, low levels of human and physical capital, and poor infrastructure. The negative effect of climate change on crop production are especially pronounced in sub-Saharan Africa, as the agriculture sector accounts for a large share of our GDP, export earnings, and employment. The impact of climate change on agriculture and human well-being include not only the biological effect on crop yield, the resulting impact on outcome, including prices, production, and consumption, and the impact on per capita calorie consumption and child malnutrition. When we do the crop modeling, it shows that by 2050, the average rice, wheat, and maize yield will decline by up to 14% on the aspect of rice, 22% on the aspect of maize, and 5% on the aspect of wheat, as a result of climate change in our region. Food availability in the region is predicted to be average 5 calories less per person by year 2050, which is a 21% decline. The number of malnourished children are expected to rise by up to 52 million children by year 2050 in our region. There is therefore need for countries to respond and act immediately to lessen the impact of climate change, to prevent serious economic consequences. Appropriate climate policies, if adopted, can stimulate proper investment. They can increase the profitability of environmentally sustainable practices, even as they generate income for small producers and investment flow for our rural communities. Climate mitigation through carbon offsets and carbon trading can increase income in rural areas in our countries, directly improving livelihood while enhancing adaptive capacity. To overcome the challenges of climate change, appropriate adaptation measures need to be promoted. Some of these measures can be constrained by factors such as their expenses, lack of knowledge on how to implement them, and countervailing beliefs and cultural practices. There is need, therefore, for awareness creation. There is need also for farmers to be provided with technical information, advice, or guidance through providing weather and seasonal climatic forecast and warning. We also need to help them with the drought or food relief when necessary, and insurances and other form of financial system and risk spreading. We must have appropriate public policies which are supportive to adaptation and are not barriers or disincentive to the adaptation strategies. Currently, we know we are talking about our indigenous crops, and we know what is going on. And we are saying it is a high time as a country and people who are quite interested in the adaptation strategies to let our politicians and others know the important role of traditional food crops in adaptation to climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, let me take this opportunity to invite our Vice Chancellor, Professor Washeke Wajohi, to come and address us. Thank you.
That this is a one-day conference. And I also do take note that we have nearly spent a third of our time today. So I'll do a lot of skipping of areas that have already been spoken into so that I can allow our keynote speakers and other participants to allow us to benefit from their deep insights. Thank you very much. But I would like to change is a topic that is actually encapsulated in our philosophy as Kenyatta University. Since we are a community of scholars committed to sensitivity and responsiveness to societal needs. And if you look at your program, our policy is there. I mean, our philosophy is there.
And this challenge of climate change is one of those areas that we are deeply committed to addressing because they affect the very core of our being, not just in this country, but also in the entire world. And so this conference, convened by AIR and our esteemed institution, is a testament of our dedication to fostering collaboration, innovation, and evidence-based discussions that will lead, I believe, to actionable solutions from which we can benefit, all of us. And allow me to just highlight a few things that we are doing in this university in respect to the theme that, of this conference. Kenyatta University is involved in several initiatives to address the impact of climate change. The university has established a green education hub. We launched this in the year 2022. And this is meant to raise great awareness in transforming universities for a changing climate. The hub is involved in research and co-creation and dissemination of teaching and learning materials on climate change, environmental sustainability, and green education. Kenyatta University is also privileged to host the UNESCO Chair for Higher Education Development for a Green and Sustainable Economy, HEGES. And this initiative entails research and innovation, development of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary competence-based sustainable curriculum, capacity building, and private-public partnership to also enhance youth employability as a pathway to transition to green economy and sustainable societies. We also have individual faculty members who are in collaborative research projects and programs that are addressing similar initiatives that are related to the theme of this conference. I'm really restraining myself because I'm a plant pathologist, and I know what climate change and how climate change has impacted prevalence and severity of diseases and impacted our entire food system. We have emergences of new pests, new diseases that are posing a challenge to also all of us. So I'm really restraining myself. So I appreciate that this conference brings together a diverse group of experts, policymakers, researchers, and industry leaders. Your presence here signifies a collective commitment to addressing these challenges head-on. And by sharing knowledge and experiences and innovative solutions, we can develop strategies that will enhance our resilience, adapt to changing conditions, and mitigate the adverse impact of climate change. The late Nobel laureate, Professor Wangari Maathai, whom I really appreciate the contributions that she made, said, "We owe it to ourselves and to the next generation to conserve the environment so that we can bequeath our children a sustainable world that benefits all." That was relevant then, it is relevant today, and it is relevant in the years to come. And we have our responsibility. Allow me to take this opportunity to extend my heartfelt appreciation to all our distinguished guests, led by our chief guest and keynote speaker, the Dr. Engineer Festus Kenyeno, represented here by Mr. John Lugata. Special appreciations to Jonathan Simonet.
Climate change and its impacts on food systems and health is not only timely, but central to the very survival and well-being of our communities. The changing climate is presenting one of the greatest challenges of our time, and it's imperative that we act decisively to mitigate its effects while building the resilience of our societies. The discussions and outcomes from this conference will contribute to informing our preparations for the upcoming Conference of Parties, or what we call COP29, in Baku, Azerbaijan, next month, helping us to present well-rounded, evidence-based strategies that address both local and global climate challenges. The science is clear that climate change is no longer a distant threat, but a reality. We see it in erratic weather patterns, prolonged droughts, rising sea levels, and more frequent extreme weather events. These changes pose a direct threat to food security, public health, and livelihoods, especially in vulnerable communities. The need for resilience and adaptation is no longer an option, but a necessity for survival. The impact of climate change on our food systems is particularly worrying. Agricultural productivity is highly sensitive to climate conditions, and as global temperatures rise, we face increased challenges to crop yields, livestock productivity, and fishery resources. Changes in rainfall patterns and extreme weather events disrupt planting and harvesting seasons, leading to reduced food availability and higher food prices. Furthermore, climate change exacerbates water scarcity, which is critical for food production, particularly in arid and semi-arid regions. For millions of people, agriculture is not just a source of food, but also a source of income. Thus, when climate-related disasters strike, they affect food security and push vulnerable populations deeper into poverty. And hence, addressing climate resilience in food systems is essential in breaking this cycle and ensuring that our agricultural systems can continue to feed the growing population sustainably. Equally worrying are the impacts of climate change on health. Rising temperatures and changing rainfall patterns have contributed to the spread of diseases such as malaria, dengue fever, and cholera. And for those of us who are here in the very first notable El Nino phenomenon in Kenya, you remember something called the Nairobi fly. I don't know, those of my age must have remembered that if you walked in the streets of Nairobi and that fly came near your face, you'd even be rather struck by a vehicle than be bitten by that fly. Because then once you touch it, it causes a very long scar on your face. First it turns black, then it turns red. That was when we knew that climate change is real. Equally worrying are the impacts of climate change on health, rising temperatures and changing rainfall patterns that have contributed to the spread of diseases such as malaria, dengue fever, and cholera. Vector-borne diseases thrive in the warmer conditions brought on by climate change, further stressing already burdened health systems. In addition, climate-related events like floods and droughts increase the risk of malnutrition and waterborne diseases. Extreme heat waves not only affect the elderly and vulnerable, but also reduce the productivity of workers, creating ripple effects on the economy and livelihoods. Air pollution exacerbated by climate change is a growing cause of respiratory diseases and premature deaths, affecting both urban and rural populations. These challenges require coordinated efforts and robust policy frameworks to build resilience in health systems. Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come for us to shift from reactive to proactive approaches in addressing climate impacts. Building climate resilience and investing in adaptation measures are critical if we are to safeguard our food systems and public health. This requires a multi-sectoral approach where the government, private sector, local communities, and international partners work hand in hand. The Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, alongside other relevant government departments, is committed to spearheading this transformation. We are working on strengthening climate resilience through several key initiatives. Firstly, Sustainable agriculture and climate smart practices, as said earlier, we are promoting the adoption of climate smart agricultural practices that enhance productivity while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This includes the use of drought-resistant crops, improved water management techniques, and agroforestry. By supporting smallholder farmers to adapt to climate variability, we aim to build a more resilient agricultural sector. Secondly, early warning systems and disaster preparedness. Through collaboration with meteorological and environmental agencies, the ministry is enhancing early warning systems to better prepare communities for extreme weather events. By improving data collection and dissemination, we are ensuring that farmers, health workers, and local authorities can respond more effectively to climate risks. Thirdly, water resource management. We are investing in water harvesting, storage, and conservation techniques to address increasing water scarcity, protecting and restoring watersheds, improving irrigation efficiency, and recycling wastewater are some of the strategies we are employing to ensure that water remains available for food production and household consumption, even in the face of climate-induced droughts. And then fourthly, in collaboration with the Ministry of Health, we are implementing strategies to enhance the resilience of health systems to climate shocks. This includes improving the capacity of health infrastructure to cope with the rising disease burden, strengthening disease surveillance systems, and addressing the link between climate change and non-communicable diseases. Lastly and fifthly, policy and legislative frameworks. To ensure the sustainability of these efforts, the Ministry of Environment is actively developing and implementing policies and regulations aimed at mainstreaming climate change adaptation and resilience across all sectors. These include the Climate Change Act and the National Adaptation Plan, which guide government action and mobilize resources for adaptation initiatives at both national and county levels. As we move forward, therefore, it's clear that building resilience and adapting to climate change requires collective effort. We need robust partnerships between government, civil society, the private sector, and international stakeholders. This is not only a national challenge, but a global one, and we must leverage global cooperation, knowledge sharing, and financial support to achieve our goals. Ladies and gentlemen, the impacts of climate change are already being felt, but we have the power to shape a resilient future. By investing in adaptation, we are safeguarding food security, public health, and the livelihoods of our people. Let us work together to ensure that no one is left behind in this journey toward climate resilience. As I close, I would like to reiterate the commitment of the Ministry of Environment and the State Department for Environment and Climate Change in addressing the pressing challenges posed by climate change. Through policies, partnerships, and innovative solutions, we can build a more resilient society that thrives in the face of climate adversity. Thank you very much.
When it comes to climate change. What we haven't spoken about that much yet is what are proven effective solutions to adapt to climate change. Because let's all face it, at this point, neither Kenya nor other settings in sub-Saharan Africa can wait for emissions to go down. Climate change is here. There are currently major challenges that populations are facing. They're experiencing floods, they're experiencing droughts, which means that policies currently already need to be adapted to make sure that populations can currently cope with those challenges. And for that, I would like to just move to the other side of the continent and just focus on Nigeria. And in Nigeria, we're working currently with AIR, with the World Bank team in Nigeria. This is joint work that I'm going to present with various co-authors from AIR as well as from the World Bank. I would like to especially thank Yetunde Fatogun and Audrey Sachs from the World Bank who are collaborating with us on this research, where I'm going to basically give some insights in like how traditional survey data remain really important, but also need to be combined with remote sensing data to make sure that we can really learn about what works for populations to adapt to climate change. And I'm going to really quickly look back at some like pretty old literature that exists in the development economics space. You will see here citations from 1998, which was a time when people were not really talking about climate change so much yet, but people were talking about the impact of droughts and shocks, very similar but maybe less frequent challenges that we're currently experiencing. And what often happens, and I don't think I have to tell that to the audience here, is that poor populations, especially in arid and semi-arid areas, they cope with these shocks by actually selling assets, and particularly livestock. It could hold for goats, it could be related to cows, and it could have major implications. Like, it may not sound as too dramatic, but the sale of a cow or the sale of a goat, or when shocks are very frequent or prevalent, the sale of multiple like cows or goats can have major implications for households. And in fact, as evidence from Ethiopia shows, like after droughts, when households had to really sell a lot of livestock to cope, households never really recovered from the fact that they actually had to sell livestock. They earned valuable income sources initially, and they lost those income sources. And as a result, they fell into poverty with all kinds of challenges related to nutrition and food insecurity as a result. But at that time, nobody was talking necessarily about climate change yet. But this is to illustrate that even when we're talking about climate change now here during this conference, the development economics literature is always focused to some extent on the impact of droughts and shocks. And I want to bring you now to like an evaluation we're conducting with the World Bank and the Nigerian government, because also in the face of climate change, social protection programs can have very different implications. They may have different effects in the presence of climate shocks than in the absence of climate shocks. Like cash transfers have all kinds of benefits. They can immediately like create like increases in consumption, increases in income. But also what we see, and like I would like to like go back to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has many similarities with many of the climate change effects, is that social protection programs can actually have different effects in the face of climate shocks when there are these large shocks happening, such as climate change, where if people are experiencing problems, they may be able to cope with these problems if they have income from cash transfers, or if they have existing savings sources, and they may be able to cope with help of those social protection programs with these shocks. And we see this specifically in Nigeria, for example, as well as in other settings, where in Niger, for example, cash transfers actually have larger effects on consumption for those households that are experiencing climate shocks. So cash transfers have additional benefits in the face of climate shocks than in the absence of climate shocks, which means that these social protection programs become all the more important. So I want to bring you to a different kind of social protection program, which I know is also very prevalent in Kenya. But I also want to just highlight that we need to go big when it comes to social protection. There are lots of small-scale social protection programs that provide like village savings and loan associations to a number of villages in Kenya. It's fairly fragmented. So what we're doing in Nigeria with the World Bank and the government of Nigeria is we're evaluating a program that focuses on savings for women in groups, and as well as livelihoods grants and like It's across 6 Nigerian states currently, and it's based on a $100 million grant from the World Bank. This is an evaluation we're conducting. We're examining the effects of this program on various outcomes, on income, on consumption, on women's agency, on gender norms, on food security. Today I'm going to primarily focus on financial inclusion, savings and credit. As you can imagine, like savings groups, like the name says it all, you would expect effects on savings when women come together in groups to save. And in that way, they can also gain access to credit. In addition, like livelihoods, women can actually gain in terms, from those savings, they can buy additional livestock, they can buy additional farm equipment, and all of these like different assets can help these women to actually protect themselves from future and shocks. And like essentially, like this is an anticipatory program where women can actually protect themselves in the face of climate shocks that will inevitably happen. And what we saw previously is that after COVID-19, these savings groups actually have larger effects. Our savings group members were protected against food insecurity consequences of COVID-19. And we could see like similar things happening in the face of climate shocks. Similarly, like in India, like self-help group members, self-help groups are probably like the largest savings group program in the world. And like the program in Nigeria is actually based on the self-help group program in India after adaptation to the context of Nigeria. We see that those self-help groups in the face of COVID-19, they also helped households cope with food insecurity challenges. So I will not spend too much time on the methodology of the study we're conducting, but I do want to say that we're talking about a study that evaluates a large $100 million grant or a loan from the World Bank, and with the idea, and that's currently happening, to guide the scale-up of this program in Nigeria. And the World Bank is currently, with support of the Nigerian government, with support of the World Bank, is currently scaling up this program based on a $500 million loan across Nigeria. So we're talking here about a really large-scale program, and it deserves also a large-scale impact evaluation. So we're talking about a sample size of close to 7,000 households, where we're conducting this evaluation. Some of the households live in local government areas where they are having access to the program. We collected baseline data before the start of the program for areas where the program was implemented, where the program was not implemented. We made sure that the comparison areas were like comparable to the areas where the program was implemented. And ultimately, we make sure that we estimate the impacts on various outcomes. We then compare actually like differences in differences over time, which essentially means that we look at differences in the group where the program is implemented in asset ownership, savings, and credits. And we compare that to the same differences in the comparison group. And like in that way, we conduct a rigorous quasi-experimental study that ultimately has the goal to contribute to evidence-based policy in Nigeria as well as globally. I'm going to really briefly go through some findings that show you what happens when we don't take into consideration climate shocks. And some of those findings may be unsurprising, but it's important to like validate some of the assumptions of the model. Important to keep in mind here, and the same holds for Kenya as well as in Nigeria, is like we're not operating in a vacuum here. Savings groups in Nigeria were implemented, and that's not new for Nigeria to have savings groups. There are many informal groups that are operating in the comparison areas. So that means that we shouldn't only ask about savings in the savings groups in the areas where the program is implemented. We should also ask about savings in the savings groups in the comparison areas where the program is not implemented. What we see in general, we're talking about like an increase in savings after 2.5 years of program implementation of about 15,000 naira. So indeed, the program leads to increases in savings. It also leads to increases in credit. And I want to briefly also give you some idea about what happens with various, actually leads to increases in non-mechanized farming equipment. Women in the areas where the program is implemented are using some of their savings and the credits that they have received to buy non-mechanized farm equipment, which helps them earn additional income. They buy also additional non-farm business equipment as well as additional land. So we see increases in all of these. I want to bring you also to the other side where we actually don't see effects on average, I want to say, on ownership of large livestock and ownership of small livestock. Just want to raise some attention to that finding where we don't find impact. It may sound slightly counterintuitive because previously I've been telling you that these savings groups can actually help women to actually buy livestock. So why are we not finding those impacts on average? I want to and this is where I want to bring in the climate change. And this is where remote sensing data become particularly important. When I started as a development economist around 2007, I conducted surveys with pen and paper. I remember very vividly bringing large suitcases of paper surveys back to my home country, and even those large suitcases fell from the airport escalators, and I was in big trouble at that moment with papers lying around the ground on the airport floor, that's not the case anymore. We don't face those challenges anymore. Nowadays, we all collect electronic data on tablets, which gives many advantages. But in the last couple of years, we have actually gained an additional advantage, and that's that we are increasingly able to also gain access to satellite data, to data from weather stations, to really learn about what kind of weather and climate households experienced in the last year, what kind of weather and data they experienced in the last 10 years, in the last 50 years, etc., etc. So that really enables opportunities also because as part of the surveys we conduct, we collect GPS data. And GPS data, we usually collect them to track households over time so that we can interview the same households over time. But they bring in an additional advantage. GPS data are essentially there to actually measure a location. And as a result, because of the increased access to weather data and climate data, we can actually, through these GPS data, learn upon a parameter around 5 kilometers around the households what kind of weather these households experience if we have their GPS data, which means that we know about the rainfall they experienced, the precipitation that they experienced, and we can essentially learn what works to reduce what works to adapt to climate shocks and what is the effect of these social protection programs for households that experience droughts and households that didn't experience droughts. And here we use the standardized precipitation evapotranspiration index. I'm far from an expert when it comes to these indices. There are people in this audience who know far more about these indices than I do, but it enables an opportunity to combine weather data with traditional social science data, and it enables us to learn bigger picture lessons about what works to adapt to climate change. So what do we see when it comes to savings? I previously unexpectedly showed to you that women's savings groups increase savings for women. What do we find if we actually when we combine this with weather data? So with help of the index I just showed you, we actually estimated whether households experienced the droughts in the year before the survey. And we then estimated impacts of the Women's Savings Group program both for households that did experience droughts and floods and households that didn't experience droughts and floods. Households that didn't experience droughts and floods, essentially they had fewer troubles and faced fewer challenges than households that did experience droughts and shocks. And as a result, they could actually, without interruptions, continue saving. So we actually see larger effects on savings for those households that didn't experience droughts and floods over the last year. Unsurprisingly, but it also really helps to understand a different finding. I want to bring you back to the fact that we didn't find effects on livestock ownership on average. What we do see that when households experience drought and floods, and I want to bring you back to the first slide, oftentimes they had to sell livestock. And that still happens in the comparison group when we're looking at this study. Households in the comparison group are more frequently selling goats, cows, chickens than households in the treatment group when they experience droughts and floods. But households that actually are benefiting from the savings group program, they don't have to sell their goats, cows, and chickens. Instead, we find effects on asset ownership that are larger when households are experiencing droughts and floods. And here I'm looking at like an overall index of asset ownership, so that includes non-mechanized farm equipment, all the assets that I previously showed you. But this result is really driven by women's livestock ownership. We're talking about a women's savings group program, so women no longer have to sell chickens if they actually are part of a women's savings group program, even if they experience a drought or a flood. Women no longer have to sell cows. Women no longer have to sell goats. And as a result, they're benefiting like to a larger extent from this program if they're experiencing droughts and floods. I'm specifically focusing on women here because we're actually, like here, this is where measurement becomes important. We're measuring the ownership of livestock and other assets, both for women and households. We only find this effect for women. We don't find the same effect when we actually when we measure asset ownership at the household level. So women's savings group programs in this case particularly protect women from climate shocks. They don't necessarily protect entire households from climate shocks, which is consistent with the idea that women are actually like using some of their savings for their own benefits and some of their credit for their own benefits. And we do actually see indeed that in the face of shocks, women who are members of savings groups don't have to sell their livestock anymore. They can use the savings that they had to like address their challenges. Like, just think about it, like it has everything to do with, and I'm sure every parent of all of you has told you this, like try to save for the future, try to save when something bad happens to you. And like this entire finding is all consistent with this finding, like where women are actually saving. It's not only good just because they can invest, it also helps them to cope with climate shocks. So all of this to say, like the Nigeria for Women project has sustained impacts on financial inclusion, both savings and credit. Midline results show larger effects of these women's affinity groups, savings groups in more moderate weather, but they have larger effects on women's asset ownership and specifically livestock when there are extreme weather events, such as droughts and floods. So I just want to like raise this point with the idea of like moving from identifying challenges to identifying solutions for climate adaptation. Like what we really, I would like start doing climate research, it's really important, of course, to identify the impacts of climate change on like droughts, on floods. There's lots of human suffering going on, but it's all the more important to think about solutions. And social protection programs, such as these women's savings group programs, at a large scale, at a national level, it's now being scaled up across the country, can actually like address some of these challenges, just like some of the climate smart agriculture practices, but it also requires us to like rigorously evaluate these programs. And that doesn't, nowadays, like there are major opportunities that we have to use such data, not just survey data, but with increases in technology, also remote sensing data, to really learn what works to help households, and in this case, specifically women, cope with climate shocks. And in this way, we can really start adopting or like generating evidence-based policy to like mitigate some of the effects of the climate crisis. So thanks all very much. I hope this serves as some inspiration also for the rest of the conference to identify solutions in addition to some of the major challenges we're facing with climate change. Thanks so much. Sure, I can speak a little bit about the partnership between Kenyatta and AIR, though Christine and like our colleagues from Kenyatta will be able to say more. Like, we're very inspired by this partnership. I think it's really critical for a global research, evaluation, and technical assistance organization like AIR to build relationships with universities that have the legitimacy to actually influence policy in East Africa, and in this case specifically Kenya. We're having a pipeline partnership program in which we're working with universities to partner both in terms of research and as well as learning from each other, building each other's capacity when it comes to research and evaluation. Okay, I can speak a little bit about that. I think one key aspect here is that if you look at the traditional research on climate change, it has primarily focused on the effects of CO2 emissions, on temperature, on extreme weather events. What we're trying to do here is slightly different. We're recognizing the reality of climate change in sub-Saharan Africa. Kenya is actively experiencing right now like floods and droughts that are associated with extreme weather events. And what we would like to do in this partnership is to really ensure that through rigorous research and evaluation, we conduct evaluations of social protection programs, such as cash transfers, such as women's savings group programs, to really learn about how such social protection programs can actually help households cope with the challenges they experience caused by floods and droughts. And with that, ultimately, like, we want to make sure that research gets into policy and make sure that like our research is very relevant for policy. So we also want to respond to the demands from Kenyan governments. What are the questions they would like to see answered to really ensure that we're not just doing research for the sake of doing research, but actively doing research in response to urgent challenges policymakers are experiencing in the face of climate change.
And Christine, this is one of the mergers of collaborations.
Thank you very much. I am Professor Washeke Wanjohi, the Vice Chancellor of this great university. I first of all want to make a correction that the academia have been left behind in driving policy change. That is not correct, because Kenyatta University, just like any other university, are driven by the three mandates that higher education and universities have. One of them is teaching and learning. The other one is research and community outreach. And the research that we do is actually packaged to drive policy. And in this university, and you can attest by the few speeches that we had in the morning, we have faculty that is really driving the agenda of addressing climate change, resilience, and adaptation. And as I said earlier, we are also hosting the UNESCO chair on hedges. So in respect to driving change through policy, universities are at the forefront. And the partnership that we began with the American Institute of Research is going to contribute to the university's thrust in addressing that agenda. And linking it with community outreach, we don't just do research for research's sake. It is research to bring solutions, not just to our local communities, but also globally, because we all acknowledge that climate change is truly a global crisis. And as Dr. Thomas said, Kenyatta University is known and has a history of being at the forefront of driving change. And I'm sure when they were scanning to look for which institution to partner with, they did their homework very well and selected Kenyatta University. And I think what we have also seen today, climate change is not a one-discipline agenda. It is a multidisciplinary, and that is why in the organization of this conference, you have actually 3 schools collaborating together to make sure that this conference is successful, and therefore we expect that the researches that are going to emanate from this particular conference are going to also involve all the faculty in the schools that I have talked about. Thank you.
And Prof, if you could just help me as well.
To be able to be closer to stakeholders and local issues. And that's one of the reasons why we got into a partnership with Kenyatta University, just for us to be able then to learn and contribute to issues that affect Kenyans. And one of them is climate change. And our partnership with Kenyatta University will help us to have a diverse approach to addressing issues around climate change. Today we have presenters from both the AIR and Kenyatta University who will be talking about the impacts of climate on food systems, but not only talking about the impacts, looking at solutions that then the government and all of us as stakeholders can be able to incorporate in our programs, in our policies, so that then we can make an attempt to, address the impacts which require a multidisciplinary approach, a multi-sectoral approach to addressing the issues of climate change. Thank you.
Madam VC, today we are in the institution.
Thank you very much. As a country, we know the great role that indigenous, not only indigenous knowledge and indigenous products play and will continue playing in helping our vulnerable communities adapt to climate change. And that is why I mentioned the aspect of indigenous plants, issues to do with indigenous seeds, because most of these seeds, they can be able to survive where what we may call improved seeds cannot be able to do it. That is where the law comes. And not only in the crop aspect, even when it comes to the livestock aspect. As a country, we need to know that God has blessed us with a great diversity of plants and animals, and we need to take care of them when it comes to using them for adapting to climate change. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen.
No, one more before we leave when it comes to this.
Thank you very much again, and thank you for raising a question that touches on my discipline, which I'm very passionate about. I think when it comes to the impact of climate change on pests and diseases, it's real. For example, when you think about the increase in carbon dioxide, that already affects the life cycle of some of the insect pests that have been so troublesome. When it comes to the rise of temperature, it also reduces the hibernation period of some of the pests and disease-causing agents that are quite troublesome. And when that happens, when the life cycle is shortened, it means that in a single season, if a crop, for example, is going to be in the field for 3 months, in a single season, that pest can go through several cycles, meaning that the population will increase to such levels that will impact very, very heavily on the crop yields. So some of the solutions that we are working on, because climate change and other agricultural practices have really destabilized the equilibrium, is to try and restore the equilibrium so that natural pests are given an opportunity to thrive in a context of changing temperature, changing carbon dioxide level, and changing water levels in our soil. So that is one of the things that we are pushing for, because we are not, we are aware that one of the contributors of climate change is use of agricultural inputs that impact negatively. So we have to work at reducing that. And so biologically trying to restore our agricultural system is one of the thrusts that my team works on. Thank you.
Now, we've recorded high temperatures, especially in the north and some parts of lower parts of the country. Are you saying that we're looking at a situation where we need to adapt more to more natural solutions to the current climate situations we find ourselves? Because what I'm hearing is that we should not just focus on, pest control, but also look at other ways we can, either smart, I don't know. I want you to unpack it for someone who's not a scientist. So that
Yes, smart agriculture. I think some of the speakers this morning did indicate that we have come to where we are after a long time. We did the little things that we thought were working positively for us, but finally we have realized that the impact is real. So the reversal is not going to be instant, and it's not going to be dependent on one single discipline. It's going to require us to work together, not just as specialists in different disciplines, but also vertically. Government across the borders, we have to work together as a globe to address this particular problem, because it is affecting the entire globe. So we should not deceive ourselves that we will get instant solutions. A single bullet solution is going to require concerted effort for us to work together consistently, persistently, with a very clear goal in mind and collaboratively. And that is why when we are working together with the American Institute for Research, we simply are going to contribute our bit into the bigger whole. Thank you.